theoretically, if you could, you would want every team you play every week to be undefeated. You would want them to do good, right? You would want them to have the best record possible so that if you beat them, it would look better on your schedule. It would look better on your victories and what you've done and what you've achieved, etc. Correct?
Deep in the heart of Texas.
We're in the business of winning.
Don't bet against me.
I don't bet anyway.
Lose your life.
All right. Wanted to give a quick take or my take on an argument I hear a lot, and that is, when it comes to college football, correct? We're going to talk about college football for a second. I hope you like my new background. I just made it, so no big deal. As you guys know, there's a few guys on here who make videos of Houston as well, so my background's just show the essence of greatness that is Dallas and A&M. Anyways, I digress. I wanted to get to a argument or something that I hear a lot about college football and conferences. So, as an Aggie fan, right, I can kind of speak heavily or my opinion on what it's like to be in the SEC versus not the SEC, right? It's kind of ultimately where this video is going. A critique I hear a lot about the SEC is how the SEC cheers for itself really hard, right? So, and again, maybe this is more localized than I realize, but I do think I've heard this on a bit of a national scale as well, right? Is that the quote-unquote brotherhood of the SEC is much deeper than other conferences. Other teams to cheer for other teams against, if Alabama was playing the Pac-12, I would cheer for Alabama maybe harder than what Pac-12 teams would cheer for that opposition playing Alabama, etc. That kind of thing, right? And, on its face, this is maybe a fair critique, but it's a bit of a shallow one. And the reason why I say that is when A&M was in the Big 12, correct? And our big game every year obviously was to play Texas, correct? That's what it was. Every day on Thanksgiving, it was one of the best rivalry in all of sports. I would say it's got to be a top 10 rivalry, right? You think about how big the state of Texas is. UT's a big program. A&M's even though they maybe have underachieved a little bit, they're a big name, in my opinion. And I know I'm a little biased. I think they're a when it comes to just name brands, right, in college football, I think A&M is up there, right? They're not necessarily tier 1, but they're up there, right? Like if you know anything about college football or if you follow sports at all, you know who A&M is, right? That's just kind of all I'm saying, which, maybe doesn't mean much. Maybe it means something. That's not really my point, correct? But when we played Texas every year, my hope was that they would be undefeated or would be highly ranked when we played them, right? And the thought process is this. We have to play you no matter what. We have to play you no matter what. It doesn't matter if you're ranked 100th in the nation or top 5 in the nation. We have to play you no matter what. So, theoretically, I want Texas to be ranked as high as possible so that when we play them and hopefully beat them, right, that win means more. That propels us up into the polls. That means more to our strength of schedule, etc., right? Because that's just how college football works, right? This is not the NFL where a win equals a win because you have things like the salary cap. You're all kind of playing under the same rules. You get to spend as much money overall on your roster as any other team, right? Which is another video I want to make is I think building a NFL roster is the most interesting of sports when it comes to building a roster. I think the NFL and football, specifically the NFL, right? Because college is based on recruiting. The NFL and building a roster, I think, is the most interesting. I think it's the most complex or has the most variables or allows you to sort of play with the numbers a little more in terms of where you're going to spend money, how you're going to build your team, etc. I think the NFL roster building is the most interesting. But when it comes to college football, right, the SEC cheers for itself, right? Whenever A&M was in the Big 12, correct? I wanted A&M to play an undefeated team every single week that we could possibly play, right? Theoretically, correct? Now, obviously, as you go longer into the year or into the season, obviously not everyone you're going to play later into the season is undefeated, right? Because you could have two teams on the back end of your schedule who've already played each other. Well, technically, one's going to have a loss, that kind of thinking, right? As you go longer into the season, obviously not everyone can be undefeated. I understand that. The point is that, theoretically, if you could, you would want every team you play every week to be undefeated. You would want them to do good, right? You would want them to have the best record possible so that if you beat them, it would look better on your schedule. It would look better on your victories and what you've done and what you've achieved, etc. So I think this SEC cheering for each other gets blown out of proportion a little bit because either A, you don't get how college rankings work, you don't get how the college system works in terms of you want your schedule to be as hard as possible. Well, for your schedule to be as hard as possible, the teams that you play need to have the best record possible, correct? So therefore, inherently, you need to rank or cheer for your own conference in some way, correct? As I go back to my example, I wanted UT to be undefeated every time we played them, and hopefully we beat them. Why? Because that's better for us. If we beat a highly ranked UT team, good. If we beat a lowly ranked UT team, let's say UT goes, they maybe win the few warm-up games you have during non-Power 5, and they're like 6-2, 6-3. Let's see, we would play them 11th or 12th game of the year. So let's say they're 6-6 or something like that, correct? That if we beat them, that doesn't really mean anything or doesn't mean as much, correct? And a lot of people would say, well, as an Aggie fan, don't you want UT to fail? Theoretically, yes. But theoretically, really what I want is for them to be good and us to be better. That's really what it boils down to. Theoretically, right, if you were going to build a strength of schedule and have the best resume possible to be, let's go before the playoff system, right? You have to be one of the top two teams at the end of the year to get into the playoff or to get into the final game, correct? Well, for that to happen, Texas probably is going to have to be pretty good, and we're probably going to have to beat them at the end of the year for it to bolster our resume, correct? And so I don't really get the critique of the SEC cheers for itself harder than other conferences. Again, either A, you don't get how the college system works, like I just explained, or B, the other reason I was going to go to is that you simply hate your opponents or your rivals to such a degree that them failing means more than you winning. And this is honestly one of the bigger scopes of A&M that I think is true, and maybe people could argue me or debate me on it, is that it really does seem like people hate A&M. They love to hate A&M, right? They love to hate A&M. And again, it's because we're on this cusp, right? Which, to be on the cusp of anything is already an achievement a lot of times. And that is that A&M is on this cusp of being a possibly great program to being a underachieving program, which is fair. Totally fair critique of A&M. I don't necessarily push back or argue against that. But the thing is, right, at least we're on the cusp. At least we are good enough to be hated in a way. And, where I was ultimately going with this is I do get the feeling for a lot of college programs is that they love to see other teams lose more than they like to see their team win. And which also kind of makes sense in a way that, there are a select few teams who are just good every year. Alabama, Georgia, UT, Oklahoma in the Big 12, USC, Clemson, Florida State in a way, more not so much more recently, Ohio State, Michigan, right? It's a lot easier to wish downfall on 5 to 10 teams than it is to be one of those average to below average or maybe slightly above average teams and want your team to do well, right? That's kind of ultimately, the main point of this video is SEC gets critiqued a lot because it feels like they cheer a lot for each other. Which, even if it's true, even if that's true, that's how everyone should be operating. That you want theoretically, hypothetically, you want every team that you play to be undefeated every time you beat them, correct? I mean, that hypothetically and theoretically would be the best case scenario for your team. Well, if you're going to accept that premise, right, then that means you want your conference, the people that you play, you want them to do well. You want them to do good. You can't have it both ways. You can't want everyone in your conference to do, really bad, right? But then when you beat them, that means it doesn't mean as much. It's worthless, right? So there's a little bit of a double-edged sword that if you're going to say, well, I just want my rivals to do really bad, well, then that means that's probably not good for you whenever you beat them, right? And so I just wanted to push back a little bit on this narrative that the SEC just cheers so hard for itself, right? A, that might be true, right? But B, that's what you should be doing in a way, right? What has made the SEC considered to be the best conference, right, over the last 10 to 20 years? Obviously championships, right? That's an obvious one, correct? But minus the last, maybe 3, 4, 5 years, right, in terms of bowl seasons or bowl games, the SEC also dominated bowl games, correct? They were just blowing other conferences out of the water in terms of their performance during the bowl season, correct? And I am one that thinks the bowl season is a good litmus test of a conference versus conference, right? Because you typically have, the fifth best ranked team in a conference playing the fifth best ranked team in a conference, roughly, right? Give or take a few positions within the conference. So, having, when the SEC would dominate bowl season, that speaks to the depth and the quality of the conference, correct? As well as the championships, whether it be, Florida, Auburn, who snuck in one, LSU every so often, Alabama, who's won a lot. That is a claim to that the person who comes out of our conference is usually the best team in the nation because the quality of the conference is so good. And the bowl records prove that. Again, minus the last 3 years or so, 3 to 5 years, which is, it's been a little more even in bowl season if I'm remembering correctly. But again, the SEC is almost always coming out with the positive bowl record, if not the best record, right? That speaks to how well the conference is, and you should want the teams in your conference to do well. Don't get me wrong, whenever A&M was in the Big 12, I wanted to beat Texas. No, obviously, right? No doubt. But I wanted Texas to be as good as possible so that win would mean more, correct? That's where ultimately where I'm getting to is this. The SEC cheers for each other. That's so lame. Well, I get what on an outside looking in sort of perspective why that would make sense. But if you really want to be honest about how your team is looked at, your strength of schedule, your record, your conference winning the majority of bowl games or things of that nature at the end of the year, championships, etc., you have to sort of inherently want your conference overall, even your rivals, to do well, except for when they play you. Then you want to crush them. I get that. But this goes back to even in the Big 12 or the SEC as an Aggie, right? I wanted Texas to do well. I wanted Baylor to do well. I wanted everyone to do as well as possible until we played them. Then I wanted to crush them, right? And that would look better on us. Even if A&M was 0-10 at the end of the year and Texas was 10-0, right? It doesn't really matter because we have to play them no matter what. Let's beat them at their best possible, at their highest peak. That will look better on us, correct? And so that's just my little pushback against. I hear a lot of times like the SEC cheers for each other more than our conferences. Yes, that might be true, but you're dumb if you don't get it. You're sort of not seeing the forest from the trees if you don't understand why you would want your conference to do well. And the SEC has been so good as of late, makes them a little easier to cheer for as well, no doubt. So that's just my video real quick on that topic. I wanted to give my 2 cents, and see you guys on the next one.